There's a moment that happens to almost everyone who eventually builds wealth, and it's never what you'd expect. It's not when they get a big raise. It's not when they finally pay off their debt. It's not even when they check their account and see a number that actually feels comfortable. The moment that changes everything is much quieter than that. It happens in a completely ordinary setting, usually alone, when a single thought lands in your brain and suddenly rearranges everything you thought you understood about money. I call it the click. And if you're 30 and broke right now, watching this video might be the thing that makes it happen for you years earlier than it would have otherwise. Because here's what nobody tells you about being broke at 30. The problem isn't usually what you think it is. It's not that you don't know you should be saving. You know. It's not that you haven't heard about compound interest or retirement accounts or emergency funds. You've heard all of it, probably dozens of times. The reason you're stuck has nothing to do with information. You have access to more financial information than any generation in history. The reason you're stuck is because something hasn't clicked yet. There's a gap between knowing what you should do and actually doing it. And that gap isn't made of laziness or stupidity. It's made of something else entirely, something that took me years to understand. My name is Tom, and I've spent a long time thinking about why some people escape financial stress while others stay trapped in it forever despite having the same information, the same opportunities, sometimes even the same income. If you're tired of watching your finances stay stuck while everyone around you seems to be moving forward, make sure to subscribe to this channel, because what we're about to talk about might be the thing that finally shifts your perspective. And I'm not going to give you another list of tips you've already heard. Instead, I'm going to walk you through what the click actually looks like, why it happens, and how to make it happen for yourself, even if you're starting from a place that feels hopeless. Let me describe what life looks like before the click, because I want you to recognize yourself in this. Before the click, you understand money intellectually, but not emotionally. You can explain compound interest to someone else, but you don't feel it in your gut. You know saving is important, but the future feels abstract and distant, while the present feels urgent and real. You've set up a budget before, maybe multiple times, but it always falls apart within a few weeks because life happens and the budget starts to feel like a cage. You feel vaguely guilty about money most of the time, a low-grade anxiety that you've learned to ignore because it never goes away anyway. And every time you read about someone who paid off their debt or built their savings, you feel a mix of inspiration and resentment because part of you suspects they had advantages you don't have. Before the click, money feels like a problem that's always chasing you. No matter how much you earn, it seems to disappear. You can't quite figure out where it goes, and you're too exhausted to track it. You have this nagging sense that you're falling behind, that everyone your age is doing better than you, that time is passing and you're not making progress. But you also feel paralyzed because every financial decision feels overwhelming. Should you pay off debt or save first? Should you invest when you barely have an emergency fund? Should you cut expenses or focus on earning more? The questions pile up and you end up doing nothing because doing nothing is easier than making the wrong choice. This is the frustrating part that nobody talks about. Financial literacy without financial psychology is basically useless. You can know exactly what you're supposed to do and still not do it. You can read every personal finance book ever written and still be broke. Because knowing isn't the same as understanding. And understanding isn't the same as feeling. And until something shifts at the feeling level, all the knowledge in the world won't change your behavior. The trigger that causes the click is different for everyone, but it almost always involves a moment of seeing clearly something you've been avoiding. For some people, it's calculating exactly how much debt they have and realizing it's higher than they thought. For others, it's watching someone their age retire early and suddenly understanding that wealth isn't random. For me, it was something embarrassingly simple. I was 31 years old, sitting in my apartment, and I did a calculation I'd been avoiding for years. I added up every dollar I'd earned since I started working at 18. Then I looked at what I had to show for it, and the number made me physically sick. I had earned over $400,000 in my lifetime up to that point. Where was it? I wasn't rich by any means during those years, But $400,000 had passed through my hands, and I had almost nothing to show for it. No house, no investments to speak of. A car worth maybe $6,000 that I was still paying off. A retirement account with $8,000 in it that I'd started and then forgotten about. That was it. $400,000 had flowed through my life and disappeared into rent, food, drinks, clothes, gadgets, trips, subscriptions, and 1,000 other things I couldn't even remember. I wasn't living extravagantly. I wasn't making terrible decisions. I was just doing what everyone does, what felt normal, what seemed fine at the time. And $400,000 had vanished. That's when the click started. Not because I felt guilty, although I did, but because I suddenly saw something I'd been blind to my entire adult life. I saw that money isn't just what you have right now. Money is also what you've let go. Every dollar I'd spent wasn't just gone. It was gone plus everything that dollar could have become. That $50 dinner from 5 years ago wasn't just $50. It was $50 that could have turned into $100 or $200 if I'd invested it instead. And I hadn't spent $50 once. I'd spent $50 thousands of times, on thousands of things that provided temporary satisfaction and zero lasting value. What happens next is the slow unraveling, where the initial insight starts connecting to everything else. You begin to see patterns you couldn't see before. You notice that your spending isn't random. It's driven by specific feelings at specific moments. You're not buying coffee every morning because you love coffee. You're buying it because you're tired, and the ritual makes you feel human for a few minutes before work. You're not upgrading your phone every 2 years because you need better features. You're upgrading because the marketing made your current phone feel old and inadequate. You're not eating out 3 times a week because you don't have time to cook. You're eating out because cooking feels like effort, and your brain wants ease. Once you start seeing this, you can't unsee it. Every purchase becomes visible in a new way. You're not judging yourself. You're just noticing. And the noticing is what breaks the pattern because suddenly you have a choice, where before you only had autopilot. This is the part most financial advice skips over completely. They tell you to track your spending like it's obvious, like anyone can do it. But tracking spending doesn't mean anything until you understand what you're really tracking. You're not tracking numbers. You're tracking decisions, and decisions are driven by emotions, habits, beliefs, and stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you deserve. The unraveling continues when you start examining those stories. Maybe you grew up believing that money is for spending, that saving is for boring people, that enjoying life now matters more than preparing for later. Maybe you absorbed the message that rich people are lucky or dishonest, so becoming wealthy would mean becoming someone you don't want to be. Maybe you've internalized the idea that you're bad with money, that it's just part of your personality, and so there's no point trying to change. These stories run in the background of your mind, like software you forgot was installed, and they shape every financial decision you make without you even realizing it. The breakthrough moment is when the pieces come together and you see the whole picture at once. It's not a dramatic epiphany. It's more like waking up slowly from a dream you didn't know you were having. You realize that being broke at 30 isn't a fixed identity. It's just a temporary situation created by a specific set of behaviors, and behaviors can change. You realize that the gap between where you are and where you want to be isn't as big as it feels. The gap is mostly psychological. The actual financial moves required to transform your situation are surprisingly simple once you stop fighting yourself. Here's what the breakthrough feels like. You stop seeing money as an enemy, or a mystery, or a moral test. You start seeing it as a tool, neutral and obedient, that does exactly what you tell it to do. If you tell it to disappear into consumption, it disappears. If you tell it to multiply through investment, it multiplies. The money doesn't care. It has no opinion about your past mistakes or your current situation. It just follows instructions. And once you internalize that, the anxiety loosens. The guilt fades. You stop feeling like a failure and start feeling like someone who just learned the rules of a game they'd been playing wrong. The most important part of the breakthrough is the identity shift. Before the click, You think of yourself as someone who's bad with money, or someone who can't save, or someone who'll never be wealthy. After the click, you start thinking of yourself as someone who's learning, someone who's changing, someone who's building. That shift in self-perception matters more than any budget or strategy because you always act in accordance with who you believe you are. If you believe you're bad with money, you'll make choices that confirm that belief. If you believe you're someone who's building wealth, you'll make choices that confirm that belief instead. Let me tell you what changes after the breakthrough, because it's not what most people expect. You don't suddenly become obsessed with saving every penny. You don't transform into some joyless optimizer who never has fun. Actually, the opposite happens. You start enjoying money more because you're using it intentionally instead of letting it drain away unconsciously. When you spend on things that actually matter to you because you've thought about what matters. When you save, you feel good about it because you understand what you're building. After the click, the math starts working in your favor for the first time. Consider someone who's 30 with essentially nothing saved. They make $55,000 a year. If they continue on autopilot, spending everything they earn the way they always have, they'll reach 65 with whatever Social Security provides and whatever scraps they manage to save in the final decade when panic set in. But if the click happens and they start directing just $500 a month into investments, even with no raises and no side hustles, they'll have over $650,000 by retirement, assuming average market returns. Same income, same expenses. The only difference is intention. And that $500 doesn't have to come from deprivation. After the click, you find the money because you're finally looking. You notice the subscription you forgot about. You see the recurring charge for something you don't use. You recognize the spending that brings no joy and redirect it to something that builds your future. The math isn't hard. The hard part is getting to the point where you actually do it. And that's what the click provides. Not information, but the emotional fuel to act on information you already have. The first year after the click is the hardest and the most important. Your old habits don't disappear overnight. You'll have moments of slipping back into autopilot. You'll make purchases you regret and skip savings contributions you intended to make. This is normal. The difference is that now you notice. You course correct. You don't let a bad week become a bad month or a bad month become a bad year. You develop what I think of as financial consciousness, a constant low-level awareness of what your money is doing and why. So how do you make the click happen for yourself if it hasn't happened yet? That's the question, and I want to be honest with you. You can't force it. The click happens when it happens. But you can create conditions that make it more likely. You can put yourself in the path of the insight and wait. The first condition is honest calculation. Do what I did. Add up every dollar you've earned in your adult life. Then look at what you have to show for it. Don't judge yourself. Just look. Let the numbers sink in. For most people, this is profoundly uncomfortable, which is exactly why it works. Discomfort is often a sign that you're getting close to something important. The second condition is future projection. Run the math on what happens if nothing changes. Take your current savings rate, probably near zero if you're broke, and project it forward 35 years. Then run the math on what happens if you save even a small amount consistently. The gap between those two futures is your opportunity cost, the price of staying stuck. When you see that gap in concrete numbers, something shifts. The third condition is identity examination. Ask yourself what stories you believe about money and whether those stories are serving you. Are you telling yourself you'll start saving when you earn more, knowing that people who earn more usually just spend more? Are you telling yourself you deserve to enjoy life now, as if enjoying life and building wealth are mutually exclusive? Are you telling yourself that investing is too complicated, when the simplest strategy of putting money into an index fund and leaving it alone actually beats most professional investors? The fourth condition is exposure to possibility. Spend time around people who have figured this out. Not rich people necessarily, but people who have the click, people who think about money as a tool rather than a problem. Read their books, watch their content. Let their perspective seep into your brain until it starts to feel normal instead of foreign. You become like the people you surround yourself with. even if that surrounding happens through a screen. The fifth condition, and maybe the most important, is self-compassion. You're not behind because you're stupid or lazy. You're behind because nobody taught you how to think about money in a way that actually works. The education system failed you. The consumer economy targeted you. The financial industry made things complicated so they could profit from your confusion. Being broke at 30 is not a character flaw. It's a predictable result of the environment you've been swimming in your entire life. I want to leave you with something that might seem strange. The click isn't about money. Money is just the surface. The click is about realizing that you have more control over your life than you've been acting like you have. It's about moving from passive to active, from victim to architect, from hoping things get better to making them better. That shift applies to everything, not just your bank account. Finances are just the place where it shows up most clearly because money keeps score in a way that's hard to ignore. If you're 30 and broke, you're not too late. You're not too far behind. You haven't wasted too much time. 30 is young. You likely have 35 or 40 working years ahead of you. That's more than enough time to build serious wealth if you start now and stay consistent. The only way to actually be too late is to watch videos like this one. Nod along, feel temporarily motivated, and then do nothing different tomorrow. The people who escape financial stress are not smarter than you. They're not more disciplined. They just had the click earlier, or they created conditions for it to happen, or they got lucky and it happened on its own. Now you know what the click is. You know what causes it. You know how to make it more likely. The question is what you're going to do with that knowledge. Tomorrow, you can wake up and go through the same motions you went through today, and the day before, and the day before that. Or you can do one thing differently. Calculate what you've earned and what you have. Project your future both ways. Examine the stories running in your head. Whatever it takes to put yourself in the path of the insight. Because once the click happens, everything changes, and it can happen at any moment, including right now, including while you're reading this, including today. I'll see you in the next one.